You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
You're listening to Fantha Tracks. Flip through the galaxy of literature. Welcome to Canon Fodder. Here is your host, Mark Newbold.
Very pleased to here on Canon Fodder to talk about all things Star Wars. But first things first, Clayton, tell me about your Star Wars journey. When did you first see it? What got you into it?
Yeah, I was one of those lucky kids who was 4 years old when the original film came out, and so I was just barely old enough to see it, and my aunt and uncle, who had seen it before me and knew the story and knew what was coming, sat me down in the theater, took me in, and kind of explained who the good guys were and who the bad guys were. And the bad guy is the guy that comes in the black cape and helmet. So they kind of gave me a little primer before the movie started, which was great. And like a lot of people, and especially at that age, it was such a formative years for me that it just switches something in your brain and your DNA changes, and all of a sudden you can't remember a time without Star Wars. I mean, it was just so much a part of my childhood at that point. And so yeah, and you remember that, of course, there were no toys at Christmas that year, but I do have an old picture or an old video of me opening up. That they had those little flashlight lightsabers that were made out of the red the red flashlight with the tube attached to it, and it came with two little round, clear, transparent discs. One was blue, one was red, so you could swap them out. And I've got video, old film of me swinging that around. And so yeah, it just became something that I thought about, played with the toys all the time. And we didn't have a lot of money as kids, and so one of the great things was I remember just taking the action figures out just in the backyard and like digging tunnels and stacking bricks to make rebel bases. It did something to your imagination in a way that I don't think we have today. Like, I think kids, are much more screen-based and they're not playing with action figures. My son doesn't play with action figures like I did. So I was hooked. I was in. My aunt took me to see Empire. We stood in line for like 4 hours at the theater, I remember. And Jedi, and came and went. And when that film left the theater, I think like a lot of us kind of felt like Star Wars was completely done. And at that point, kind of turned toward, I'd always loved the behind the scenes documentaries and the segments that would pop up on the news every once in a while. And so I really got into that. Fascinated with how guys like Phil Tippett and Dennis Muren and Dykstra and Edlund and all of them, how they sort of reinvented visual effects with the trilogy. And so I got really into that. Loved the old Cinefex magazine. Sorry it's gone, although Ian Fales' befores and afters has kind of filled that hole a little bit. And so, yeah, I really got into just the behind the scenes, the making of. And then I was, remained a fan throughout the years in the dark times when there were no movies, and got very excited when the special editions came out. I grew up in Southern California, so we would go to the Chinese theater when those films were re-released, and it kind of kept us nourished, so to speak, for a while until the prequels came out. Just kind of remained a casual fan throughout the years, but where it really kind of turned for me was when the company was sold and The Force Awakens was announced. Just like the trailer says, there's been an awakening. Can you feel it? It was almost like an awakening in my own fandom, and it was a great, exciting, fun time, that whole period, as you know. And so by accident, hitting this intersection where my fandom met my work interests, my work at the time, because I had never gone to Celebration before. I'd always wanted to, had never gone. But that year, like 2015, I told my wife, this is what I'm going to get myself for Christmas. I'm going to do the 3-day pass to Celebration. I'm going to go out and finally experience what this is all like. And at the time, I was working for ABC News here in the States, and my bureau chief knew that I was a fan, and he knew that I told him I was taking time off to go to Celebration. And probably a week before, he emailed me and he said, if you're going to be there anyway, you may as well work if you want and file some stories from there. And it was like a light bulb went off, and it was kind of like, I never even really thought about that being a possibility. It was great because my job was like covering natural disasters and brush fires and crime and all sorts of different things. Like, this is awesome. And so that kind of started me on the journey of doing mostly behind the scenes kind of features, again, because that's what I loved. I mean, I love the stories, I love the actors, I love all of that, but it was the visual effects and the behind the scenes stuff. I did a bunch of stories from Celebration that year, but after like Rogue One came out, we did a bunch of behind the scenes features on all of the visual effects in that film. And so, yeah, that kind of put me on this path of anytime that I could, I was pitching ILM, trying to get ILM or SkySound or whoever would listen to let us come in and do some sort of feature story, because it was just like, as just walking through the doors there is just kind of a magical experience. And so whatever I could do to come up with some good ideas to share that with the world was how it all started.
Hi, this is Andy Seacombe, otherwise known as Watto, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
So much of what you say there resonates with me, and lots of things are very similar. Just how the way you describe it, changing your DNA, that's so true. And you've got to have been through it to understand that, because I kind of vaguely remember $6 Million Man, Planet of the Apes and all that stuff. And here in the UK, we had the old shonky Doctor Who and all that wobbly set stuff. And then Star Wars comes out, and you see kids on the internet now saying, I don't know whether they're insanely clever or ridiculously stupid, but they say, when did the world become colour? Because all the photographs I see from back in the day are black and white. It's almost like Star Wars was the thing that turned the world into... I know the Beatles were, but, it felt like Star Wars was the thing that turned the world into colour. It's such a similar mindset of when the original trilogy finished. Wow, look at all these amazing people we've been reading about, watching the making of Raiders and, the making of Empire, all that stuff. It pulls you in. That's a great way of thinking. And bringing you through your career to where... I say we collectively because we're both writing for the same thing. That must be a joy for you.
Oh, it is. I pinch myself every day that, thinking that, the oldest book that I own is that original Art of Special Effects that Thomas G. Smith wrote in '86, I think it came out.
Yeah.
And I got it as a gift, either my birthday or Christmas. I don't remember which, but, and that the hours that I spent flipping through that book and reading about all of the pioneers of ILM, and then fast forward to 2026 and last year, Star Wars Day, like I find myself at the original ILM headquarters on Valjean Avenue in Van Nuys, California, walking around the place with Dennis Muren, who hasn't been inside the building in 50 years.
That's mad.
And it's such a surreal moment to realize who you're kind of walking around with and just kind of chatting with, and the history in the building, and how these band of misfits just changed history when it comes to cinema. And so the fact that our names appear on, by Mark Newbold, by Clayton Sandell on the ILM website is just like, I don't know who made that mistake. I don't know who let us in the door. Like it's so cool and so much fun, and I don't take it for granted, and I treasure it every day that I get to be a part of this team. It's surreal, isn't it? Like.
Oh, yeah. I can see how you lot got picked. I've got no idea how I'm clowning my way through this. but I totally get what you say about Muren. I met him very briefly at the Hulk premiere in 2003. Like, quick handshake, hello, and pleased to meet you, and interviewed him afterwards, and or email. Actually, no, it was a telephone call. And that was wonderful. But I think sometimes when you meet these people, you almost have to step back and take a second to think, good grief, I was with the guy. I think with Muren, it's that scene in Empire when you see the Tauntaun walk going across the icescape and the camera's tracking, and how he worked out the maths for that.
Right, exactly.
I can't do simple division. I wouldn't have a clue. So,
Oh, I know, yeah.
Incredible.
And just the fact that he's such an artist, and somewhere around here I have his the little student film that he made, but he's such an artist, but he's somebody who just takes a year off to learn computer graphics.
Yeah.
That's That's a higher level of thinking and artistry, that kind of just defines the place. There's so many people like that in the company. Even today, guys like John Knoll and
Oh
others
yeah.
who are, just absolute groundbreakers, and it's fun to see them still kind of innovating to this day, which is great.
Absolutely. And I find uniformly approachable as well, because
Oh,
they know we don't, we get we're laymen in this sense. We get the cliff notes, but they're so deep into it but they're still happy to kind of put it in a framework that we can understand, that we can then translate to everybody else. So I kind of get that. I know enough about that for that to make sense in my head.
yeah, exactly. Like I think somebody like Noel, Noel himself was a fan, and I think that they realize, yeah, like I'm not someone who's going to understand like what subsurface scattering is or how, how
Yeah, yeah.
but they do a great job of, I mean, they are storytellers, so they do a great job kind of translating all of that. And I think that's what's fun about the articles we get to write, is that we are kind of walking that line between um, making them something that visual effects artists and professionals will appreciate,
Yeah.
um, but also not making it too technical that you don't lose the sort of gee whiz magic for laymen like us. And so. It's an interesting balance to kind of try and walk, but so far I think we're doing it okay, and get a lot of feedback on different stories, and people seem to love it. So yeah, I hope they'll have us continue and for as long as possible.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark fanthatracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
You've also been involved in some of the Star Wars books.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
It's interesting. I was working at ABC News. I had been there for 20 years, and then this little thing called the global pandemic hit in 2020. At the end of 2020, I became part of massive wave of layoffs across ABC, the Walt Disney Company, who owns the ABC, and so I left in February 2021, and as I was in between jobs at the time, it was as simple as this. I had reached out to a publicist that I had worked with in the past on DK books, when they would work with them and write stories about the books and things like that. So I had contact with this publicist, and I reached out and I said, if you ever have a need, I'd like to raise my hand to be a contributor to whatever in the Star Wars world. And some time went, but months kind of went by and nothing really happened. And then in the fall of 2021, they came calling, and it was to contribute to the Star Wars Timelines book. And I was really excited to do it. It ended up being the hardest thing I think I've ever worked on, because it was such a massive, just the scope of it, going through not only the films and the shows, but the comics, which I was not super familiar with, and so I was probably went through and read, uh, you know, hundreds and hundreds of comic stories that I had to work in, video games, novels, all of these things. So that was how I kind of got started, and I was one of a team of people that worked on that. Jason Fry and Cole Horton, Kristen Baver, and Amy Rickow, and it was an amazing experience. But again, it was like the hardest thing ever. I had this text message thread going with Kristen and Amy, and I was like, "Is it always like this?" Because they had more experience in it than I did, and they said, "No, this is the hardest thing we've ever done." And even the editors at DK were like, "This is the hardest thing we've ever tried to organize and keep straight." So that was the first one, and then after that one came out, I had just finished it, and about a week later, I got an email from Insight Editions that was putting together the Return of the Jedi visual archive. And again, I was one of a few that worked on that and had my sort of sections that I was responsible for, and that was a lot of fun, because that was more of my taste or my interest was because it incorporated a lot more behind the scenes kind of stuff. And the editors and the graphics people who worked on that book were amazing, and they had really creative ideas, and it was turned out way better than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be good, obviously, but when they went into the archives and found like Warwick Davis's letter to George and reprinted that, and the Polaroids of the rebel soldier, all these different little elements in the book that just turned out really great. And so that was a tremendous amount of fun. And so there's a version of that visual archive book that is now coming out, I think, in the fall now. It's kind of been production issues and things have kind of pushed it back. But the version that's coming out will cover the Phantom Menace, which was a lot of fun to work on, because I don't know about you, but I was not a big fan of the prequels when they came out. I call myself a reformed prequelist. And so I've learned to like them and appreciate them a lot more in the last 5 years. But so working on so it's sort of ironic that someone who didn't really dig the Phantom Menace when it came out ended up working on a book about it. So that's been fun too.
I totally hear you on Phantom. When that came out, I saw it in Vegas. So me and a friend were doing a bit of a road trip for a couple of weeks, and walked out. We saw it at the MGM, the showcase at the MGM. We walked out across the car park, walking to a bar to get a beer, and I turned to my friend and said, "What the was that?" And but then we've seen it again and again and again, and I think it's such a rewatchable film.
Yeah, it is a rewatchable film, and yeah, I did the same thing. We had that same conversation with friends. But then, as time goes on, you realize that this film was like Star Wars to a lot of kids that were very young in 1999. And so for them, this was their on-ramp to the Star Wars highway, and they absolutely love it. And it's funny because a few years ago, I showed my son The Phantom Menace, and he's 12 now, so he was probably 8 or 9 at the time. Absolutely loved Jar Jar Binks, instantly favorite character. And it's like, okay, I get it now. I kind of saw him see it. And it made more sense to me, and I understand and appreciate it for that reason.
You mentioned going to Celebration. I've done a bit of stage hosting at Celebration with the podcast stage, but you've actually done panels.
I've done a couple. Yeah, it was the first one I did was in 2023 there in the UK. I was at the time talking to ILM, and we were working on different projects and things at the time, and I basically just volunteered, and they were doing a panel with Doug Chang and Jason Horley, who's a concept artist lead at ILM in London. And so it was the two of them. I just kind of raised my hand, and the more we talked, it was like, okay, this is cool. Let's do this panel. And so it was phenomenal, and it was quite an experience because I had prepped so much. And I thought I was ready to do it. But what was funny is I was with Greg Grusby, who's the head of communications at ILM and Sky Sound. And we walked in from the back into the room where this panel with Doug and Jason was going to be at. And I made the mistake of not walking around and seeing what the room looked like. So I was backstage. I knew there was going to be a lot of people out there, but it wasn't until I walked out on stage that I almost started to have a panic attack. It was like, because I'm used to going on camera and everything for my job, but that's with like 2 people standing there, and coming out on stage, it's like my lizard brain kicked in. There were so many people in the lights. You couldn't even see all of them. You could just tell that there was a ton of people, and see a few of my friends. So it was a very nerve-wracking initial 10 minutes. I kind of was able to stammer out a question, let Doug and Jason kind of talk for a couple of minutes while I sort of gathered my thoughts and calmed down a little bit. But it was great. It was so much fun, and they were great. The audience seemed to like it, so I kind of made it through, I think, without really anybody knowing that I was about to pass out. But but it was great. And then so that was the first one. And then Celebration in Japan last year, I guess. I hosted the Manga Mania panel for Lucasfilm Publishing, and that went much better. It was great because by that time I'd had a little more experience at a couple of different Comic-Con type events here in the States.
I've seen online that you've done a few other events as well. Across the States.
And that's really fun, and I enjoy that now more than I did that original one with Doug and Jason. So it was just, I think, just kind of settling in and getting used to the crowd and reading the crowd and kind of crafting a conversation that you think will be interesting to the crowd. It's an interesting mix, isn't it? Because you want to hit like the highlights and the things that it's almost like a concert. You want to hear the songs that you're familiar with. But all the hits, my philosophy is you also want to try and give the audience something they've never heard before. You hope that they leave there learning something or hearing an anecdote that they've never heard before. So I find that an interesting challenge.
It is a bit nerve-wracking. I've not gone out to hundreds or thousands. My panels I do are in front of 80, 90, 100 people, so it's not quite the same. You definitely want to get the flow of the conversation going. That's for sure.
Yeah. The dynamics are the same, though. I mean, it's a big crowd of people, and it might have been 2016, and I know 2023. Watching you sort of manage the panels and running around and doing all of that was great.
It is good fun. It's a privilege to be able to do it. That's for sure.
It is. It really is. Yeah.
Hey, man, it's me, Kevin Smith, Star Wars fan, Fantha Tracks fan.
What is lighting you up right now about Star Wars? We're heading towards the 50th at rapid pace. We've got Mando and Grogu out in just a few weeks, really. So what's really exciting you at the moment?
Yeah, that film I am excited about. We talked about this a little bit before, but I have seen a little bit of the film when I was up at Skywalker Ranch, and I'm very excited about what I saw. And I think people are gonna love it. But it is just great to be back in that mode where we know that a Star Wars film is coming back to the big screen. Nothing against the streaming shows, but there is nothing like sitting in a theater with like-minded fans who kind of get all the references and sort of feeding off that energy of the crowd. There's just nothing like it. And so, yeah, it's the films that are coming out. I'm really excited about what Starfighter is going to do. It's funny. I was in third grade when Return of the Jedi came out, and my friend Chris Martinez came up to me on the playground, and he had seen Jedi before I had, and he revealed to me that Luke and Leia were brother and sister, which I didn't know. And I was kind of excited to hear it, and then it was more of a bummer. It's like that was a spoiler. I would have loved to have been surprised by that. So it's funny now because we're in this world, you especially, with all the news that you cover constantly. I mean, you are so dialed in. And I try to, having been spoiled by that experience in my formative years, I try to take a step back and not learn. I don't want to know anything about the story in a lot of ways. I want to kind of be surprised. I want to have that fresh experience. So it's been tricky. Like, things will pop up and I want to click on it and I want to read. Then I go, no, I don't want to know too much.
Well, I think it's going to be an amazing year. I'm so looking forward to writing more stuff with yourself and the rest of the gang because that was a joy. But most importantly, thanks so much for jumping on today. I really appreciate that.
Well, I really appreciate you inviting me. This is a lot of fun, and I hope we get to do it again. And may the Force be with you, Mark.
Thank you for joining us for this special edition of Canon Fodder. For more Star Wars podcast content, be sure to subscribe to Fantha Tracks Radio on your podcatcher of choice. Subscribe to all our social media at links.fanthatracks.com. Be sure to be checking out fanthatracks.com daily for all your latest Star Wars news. And you can also join us live on YouTube for Good Morning Tatooine every Sunday evening at youtube.com/Fantha Tracks TV.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Desert Planet Discs.